My mom is something else. She really is. When they were married, they already had 2 kids and were pregnant with number 3. My mom loves kids, like really loves them. She is constantly followed by a trail of her own kids, but can never seem to get enough. My dad worked a lot. 14 kids are a lot of mouths to feed. One morning, when everyone was up and ready for school, I noticed that backpacks were lined up but not packed. I knocked on my mom's bedroom door and could hear crying. She told me that she had been feeling so tired lately that she had gone out and bought a pregnancy test. As it turns out, she was pregnant again. Without a doubt, I lived in one of the loudest, busiest, and craziest households in our town. I have 14 siblings, a mom and dad, and we all live in the same house. When my mom got pregnant for the 15th time, the other 14 of us were less than thrilled. Well, except for the youngest ones. They just love the idea of a baby and not being the babies themselves anymore. I was the first to hear the news that my mom was pregnant again. When I told the older ones, I reminded them to be supportive, regardless of how we all felt. My dad was working out of town at the time, and I felt like we had to play his role too and be ultra supportive. My mom was more emotional than usual. The hormones seemed to be working overtime. She instantly started to get morning sickness, which meant even more chaotic mornings. I took over getting breakfast for all the little ones, and my older sister and 2 older brothers took over getting them dressed and backpacks packed and lined up at the front door. My mom was so grateful, and she kept promising that things would get easier and that we wouldn't have to help as much once the first trimester was over. She was always super sick in those first 3 months and seemed like her old self again once they were past. I had to cut back on my hours at the store, at least until my dad was back in town. My boss was good about it, but I could tell she was a little irritated. When my dad got home, we were so relieved. We had all pitched in, but even with everyone helping, with my mom out of the picture, it was an impossible amount of work. Just imagine what making dinner every night for 15 people would look like. Then imagine the dishes. What about bath nights? Those were fun. I think more water ended up on the floor than ever went into getting those little monsters clean. One night, after my mom had passed out on the couch 10 minutes into watching a show, and the younger ones were in bed, we sat around the kitchen table with my dad and had a talk. My dad said he had some bad news for us, but wasn't ready to tell my mom yet, as he didn't want to worry her. His eyes swept around the table, taking each one of us in, and then he said, "My recent trip out of town for work was my last trip." We looked at each other, all a little confused. "We thought you said you had bad news, Dad." I said, "That's good news." My dad said, "Yes, that's the good part, but the bad part is that I won't be going out of town again." He hesitated, took a deep breath, and told us he had been laid off. We sat there in silence for a moment, all of us thinking the same thing. Great, there goes having a life. There goes making my own money. There goes a lot of things. He said, "Before you get too worried, I have a lead on another job. It's just that it doesn't start for another 6 months." He went on to say that we had enough in savings that we should be okay to live for those 6 months. Then we started to see things differently. So we would have to pinch pennies for a few months. My dad would be home full-time, which meant more help with the littles. It also meant I could increase my availability at work, pick up some extra cash to help out, and get back into my boss's good graces. I went to bed that night feeling a little unsure of things, but mainly pretty hopeful that everything would turn out as it should. The next morning, my dad told us he had told my mom, and that needless to say, she was a little worried. She was happy to have my dad around more for help and support, of course, but she said she was worried about the job falling through or some such thing. I have to admit, that had been on all of our minds too. By the time the due date approached, we had all decided we had to talk to our parents about not having any more babies. We were all excited to find out if we were going to have another brother or sister. But what we got, we were not exactly prepared for. 3 days after the due date had passed, my mom went into labor. Luckily, my dad was home at the time, and we got to the hospital just in time. They say with every pregnancy, labor gets faster and faster. We had done the math and figured that if that were true, we would have, about 1 minute from the time the first contraction hit to when that head popped out. It wasn't quite that fast, but there was still one major surprise waiting for all of us. All 14 of us were in the waiting room waiting for the news. We were taking bets as to whether it would be a boy or a girl when my dad came down the hallway, looking exhausted. We all jumped up when we saw him and said, tell us, is it a girl or a boy?" My dad's eyes swept over all of us, as they so often did when he had something significant to say. And he said, "You're all right. It's twins, a boy and a girl." I felt my knees buckle out from underneath me and plop down in the seat that was, luckily, right underneath me. We were happy my mom and the babies were healthy, but we couldn't hide our horror. "Dad," the oldest said, "we've all talked about this, and while this may not be the time, there is never a quiet time around our house, and there certainly won't be now. We can't handle any more babies. We just can't." I chimed in with, "We love you and Mom so much, and we love that Mom is so obsessed with kids. But as much as we do that, we can't afford these twins, let alone any more. And if we leave it up to Mom, there will be more." My dad nodded a tired and sad nod. He loved my mom so much and had always vowed to give her everything she wanted. But we could all see he knew we were right. He talked to us about the never-ending pressure to provide for 14, now 16 children. He told us that he was just getting too old, but didn't want to say anything to my mom. My older sister included how we should all, at least us older kids, be part of any future decisions to bring more mouths to feed into the family, because it fell on all of us to help out. She explained that it wasn't that we minded helping, just that we had our own things we needed to save for: cars, college, weddings. Working so hard for pennies when the bulk of our paychecks had to go to maintaining such a huge household just wasn't fair. My dad listened intently to everything we had to say. What he said next floored all of us. He had never so much as said boo without talking to my mom about it first. But he promised that while my mom was in the hospital in recovery, he would make an appointment to get a vasectomy done so he couldn't get my mom pregnant again. He said he would tell her, but not until after it was done, or he could chicken out and let her convince him not to. A week later, we brought 2 more tiny people into our tiny house. My dad had kept his promise and gotten snipped. My mom was less than impressed when she found out, but my dad had the perfect response. "I won't bring any more children into this household that I can't feed." So life went on as before. But we all breathed a sigh of relief that the constant stream of new babies coming into our house had stopped. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button. And tell us in the comments section what you thought